What's going on, guys, and welcome back to Command Point. In today's video we're doing something a little different and playing a game of Commander with some upgraded 40k decks. This is actually the second game I played with my friend BK from Mostly Casual Commander, so if you enjoy this video be sure to head over to his channel and give him a subscribe.
Hey everyone, it's BK from Mostly Casual Commander. We're a YouTube channel showcasing our gameplay footage specific to Magic the Gathering's Commander format. Our focus is on having fun, so we try to strike the balance between competitive and casual play. If that sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you to check out our channel, link in the description. When we learned that Magic was making a Warhammer 40k product, we knew just who to ask to join us at our table, and we're thrilled to have a game with Ryan from Command Point. Let's take a look at the commanders and get into the gameplay. Command Point and Mostly Casual Commander are also on Discord and Patreon. I won the die roll, and I'm playing Mtg the Stormlord, leading my Necron army from the graveyard to the battlefield. Kovacs bows to the gods of chaos with Be'lakor, the Dark Master, at the helm. He's going to punish his opponents with a bunch of demons. Your boy Ryan has Marneus Calgar, leading an army of Astartes warriors. Lastly, we have Chris unleashing a Tyrannid swarm with Magus Lucia Kane at the helm. Let's get this battle started. I kick the game off by drawing and playing a Baron Moor as my land for turn, which enters the battlefield tapped. I pass the turn over to Kovacs, who plays a Swamp as his land for turn, followed by a Wayfarer's Bauble. And he can break that to go grab another land. He passes the turn to Ryan, who plays a Plains with a tank on it as his land for turn, and passes over to Chris. He plays a tapped Frontier Bivouac as his land before saying go over to me. I drop a Laser Swamp as my land for turn, and then I cast Mask of Memory, an equipment that'll allow me to start drawing additional cards. I pass the turn over to Kovacs, who plays a Mountain as his land for turn. He activates Wayfarer's Bauble, killing it dead, and then he'll grab an island out of his library and put it onto the battlefield tapped. He passes the turn to Ryan, who plays Choked Estuary as his land. He has to say go over to Chris, who plays a fancy Unfinity Forest as his land. He follows that up with a Biophagus, allowing him to get some additional power and toughness on his creatures. Onto my turn, I play a Swamp as my land, and then I cast Canoptic Wraith. This little guy can't be blocked, and he can ramp me some additional lands if I kill it after I attack. Onto Kovacs' turn, he plays another Mountain as his land for turn, and then he casts Dark Apostle, allowing him to start cascading if he casts non-creature spells. Onto Ryan's turn, he plays a Swamp as his land, followed by one of his non-40k cards in his deck called Kaya, Geist Hunter. This is a sweet Planeswalker card that can activate in a bunch of different ways. Notably, its -2 activation can double the amount of tokens he produces in a turn. On Chris's turn, he plays Exotic Orchard as his land, and with that out on the battlefield, he can cast his commander, Magus Lucia Kane. And because he used Biophagus to cast her, she'll enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on her. He'll still move through his combat step, so Lucia will also trigger then and get an additional +1/+1 counter. On to my turn, I play another Swamp as my land. Go figure, because it's a mono black deck. I equip Canoptic Wraith with my Mask of Memory, and I attack Chris. He can't block it, so I deal 2 damage. This triggers both of my cards, so I'll sacrifice Canoptic Wraith to ramp by getting a couple of Swamps out, and then after that, my Mask of Memory said draw 2 cards and discard 1, and I do that by discarding a Swamp. I pass the turn over to Kovacs. He plays a Chromatic Lantern, allowing his lands to be tapped for any color, and goes to the red zone.
Combat swing 3 at BK.
No, I heard kind of cringe.
Dude.
Heck yeah.
Whoa.
You want a high five?
Yes. That was really bad.
I can't stand by and let this embarrassment and let this cringe hurt me.
So after Kovacs attacked me for no reason, he passes the turn to Ryan, who plays a Prairie Stream as his land for turn. Then he'll cast Vanguard Suppressor. This allows him to start drawing cards whenever it deals damage. He activates Kaya, giving his creatures Death Touch until the end of the turn, but he then passes. Onto Chris, he played an Island, followed by Shadow in the Warp. So this not only reduces the cost of some of Chris's spells, but also punishes his opponents for casting non-creature spells. Then he moves into combat, triggering Lucia and attacking Ryan, dropping him down to 36. He passes the turn over to me, I play another Swamp as my land for turn, and I cast Mystic Forge. So I have to pay 2 life due to Chris's enchantment. Mystic Forge allows me to start looking at the top card of my library. If it's an artifact or colorless, I can cast it. I cast a Mind Stone for my hand because I can't cast what's on top of my library right now. Then I pass the turn. Kovacs plays Lucius, the Eternal. This is a hasty threat, so it can attack this turn. He chooses to pick on me like a jerk, and I have no blockers, so he drops me to 27. After that, he passes the turn back over to Ryan. He draws and plays a Sunken Hollow as his land for turn, entering the battlefield untapped. He casts his commander, Marneus Calgar, and he's ready to start making tokens and drawing cards. He activates Kaya, again giving his creatures Death Touch. He moves to combat with his Vanguard Suppressor at Chris. When that deals damage, Vanguard Suppressor will trigger, allowing Ryan to draw a card. Over to Chris's turn, he plays a Temple of Mystery as his land. This allows him to scry, and he puts that card back on top of his library. He then plays Screamer Killer, using his Biophagus and giving it a +1/+1 counter. After that, he casts Venom Thrope. That's a hard to deal with Tyrannid that can fly and can't be targeted by opponent spells. He moves to combat, triggering Lucia, giving it a +1/+1 counter. On my turn, I play Tortured Existence. Not a 40k card, but still really good in this deck. I take 2 life, thanks to Chris. Then I cast my commander, Imhotep the Stormlord. This will start making me 2/2 Necron tokens if I can get stuff out of my graveyard. Then I activate my Mystic Forge, exiling the swamp on the top of my library, allowing me to cast Thought Vessel from the top of my library. Again, thanks to Mystic Forge. Then I equip my Mask of Memory to Imhotep, and then I pass the turn over to Kovacs, who plays Sunken Hollow as his land for turn. He casts Nurgle's Rot on Imhotep. So if Imhotep dies, not only does he get Nurgle's Rot back to his hand, but he'll also get a Plague Bearer of Nurgle. Kovacs then casts Bituminous Blast. So not only does this cascade into a Worn Power Stone that enters the battlefield tapped, but this also targeted Imhotep, killing Imhotep dead. So the Nurgle's Rot goes back to Kovacs' hand, and he gets that Plague Bearer of Nurgle token. I decide to have Imhotep go to my graveyard, because it's probably better than my command zone. Kovacs attacks me with his guys, dropping me down to 16. Then he passes the turn over to Ryan, who plays another Tank Plains as his land for turn. He -2s Kaya's ability, allowing him to double his token production. He then activates Marneus Calgar, getting 4 Astartes Warrior tokens onto the battlefield, and each one of those will trigger Marneus, giving him a card draw. He moves to combat at me, dropping my life total down to a very uneasy 7. But yeah, no, everything's fine. This is no big deal, everything's fine. On his end step, I activate my Tortured Existence, and I put a creature card into my graveyard and get Imhotep back to my hand. On to Chris's turn, he plays Harrow, and this makes him sacrifice a land, and then he gets 2 lands back out onto the battlefield, untapped. In this case, it's a mountain and a forest. Then he casts the Swarm Lord, using his Biophagus, so it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. In addition, his Screamer Killer triggers, so he could sling 5 points of damage at somebody, and I get really nervous.
Well, do you want to be friends?
I would like to be friends. I mean, I don't want to like go out this early in the game. You know
So if you want to be friends, then I won't do it to you.
What do you propose? So we make a truce for 2 turns.
Alright.
It could go anywhere.
Alright, 5 damage to Marneus.
We'll see if that truce holds up, or maybe my opponents will just kill me anyways, given my current state of things. Chris moves into combat, attacking both Kovacs and Ryan. So Kovacs will take his beats from Screamer Killer, but Ryan decides to block Lucia with one of his Astartes warriors. This will kill her. So the Swarm Lord will trigger, allowing Chris to draw a card, and Ryan takes the damage from his unblocked creatures. On his second main phase, Chris casts Hardened Scales, allowing him to produce additional +1/+1 counters on his creatures. Onto my turn, I play a Reliquary Tower, giving me no maximum hand size. Then I'm able to start playing cards off the top of my library. So I cast Psychomancer, which can start draining out my opponents each time one of my artifacts goes to my graveyard. Off the top of my library, I'm able to cast a Commander Sphere, which not only ramps me with mana, but I could also sacrifice it to draw a card. However, Chris's enchantment does deal me 2. I activate Mystic Forge, exiling the land on the top of my library, but unfortunately it really didn't do much for me. So I cast my commander from my hand, Imhotep the Stormlord, and with that out, I float 1 black mana with Commander Sphere, sacrificing it to draw a card, which triggers my Psychomancer, draining Kovacs 1 and gaining me 1 life. Then I draw the card off the top. Mystic Forge still lets me look at the next one, but it doesn't do anything either way. Kovacs casts his commander, Be'lakor the Dark Master. When it enters the battlefield, it'll drain him 2, but allow him to draw 2 cards. He plays a mountain as his land for turn. He recasts that Nurgle's Rot onto Imhotep. Thanks, bud. Shadow in the Warp will ping him 2, and then he moves into combat. He really hates the Necrons, so he attacks me. I line up my blocks, blocking all but the Plague Bearer of Nurgle, so that'll deal damage. My 2 creatures die, but Psychomancer will see both of them dying, so it'll drain Kovacs 2 and gain me 2 life. Nurgle's Rot went back to his hand and then he got another Plague Bearer of Nurgle. And thanks to Bellicor, when it entered the battlefield, he could sling 1 point of damage, and he chooses me. He then casts his Nurgle's Rot onto Chris's Biophagus. He passes the turn over to Ryan, who plays Dark Water Catacombs as his land. He activates Kaya's -2 ability, and then he casts Sicarian Infiltrator with Squad 2, meaning that he would make 1 Sicarian Infiltrator, but because of Kaya's ability, he'll then make 2. Each time one of those entered the battlefield, he got to draw a card. Then he casts Skull Clamp. He took 2 points of damage from Chris's Shadow in the Warp, and moved to combat, knocking me out of the game. Good game, bud. Then he passes the turn, he remembers to take his 2 from Shadow in the Warp, and then Chris casts his Commander again, which gets a +1/+1 counter on it thanks to Biophagus, and an additional one thanks to Hardened Scales. He then casts Cultivate, and he'll get a forest to the battlefield and a mountain to his hand. He moves into combat, triggering Lucia, getting a +1/+1 counter on Screamer Killer, which doubles because of Hardened Scales. He attacks both Kovacs and Ryan. Kovacs declares a block, he'll drop to 14, and Ryan 28.
And then I will pass turn.
Untap, upkeep, draw. I'll see myself out. On to Kovacs' turn, he plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and then he casts Mortarion, Daemon Primarch. This will trigger Bellicor, so he'll sling 5 points of damage at Chris's face. Then he'll move to combat with Bellicor at Chris, flying over the top of his defenders, dealing him a bunch of commander damage. On to Ryan's turn, he'll activate Kaya's +1, giving a +1/+1 counter to one of his tokens, and all his creatures gain Death Touch. Then he'll cast Defenders of Humanity, where X equals 4, take 2 from Shadows in the Warp, and make 4 Astartes Warriors. Then he'll move into the red zone at Chris. Chris declares a blocker with his commander, who will die, triggering the Swarm Lord, allowing him to draw a card, and Vanguard Suppressor, dealing damage to Chris, draws Ryan a card. Chris drops to 18, Ryan gets that card from Vanguard Suppressor, and Chris plays a mountain in his second main phase. Thanks to the cost reduction of Shadow in the Warp, Chris recasts his commander, Lucia Kane, and again, it gets a +1 counter on it because of Biophagus, and 1 more because of Hardened Scales. Chris also casts Melanthrope. When it entered the battlefield, he exiled Kovacs' graveyard, getting a +1/+1 counter on it, and again replaced with Hardened Scales. He moves to combat, swinging at Ryan. Ryan declares blocks against one of his creatures, and takes a whole bunch of damage. On his end step, Kovacs cast Brainstorm, drawing 3 and putting 2 of them back in any order. Then onto his turn, he draws and plays an island as his land for turn, followed by a War Storm Surge. This will start slinging damage every time a creature enters his battlefield. He casts Abaddon, the Despoiler, so this triggers War Storm Surge, dealing 5 points of damage to Melanthrope. Then Kovacs moves into the red zone, swinging at Chris. Chris declares a block against Bellicor, and his creature had Death Touch, so they both die. But Kovacs still smashed into him enough to drop him down to 8 points of life. He passes the turn to Ryan, who plays a Sky Cloud Expanse. Then he activates Kaya's +1, giving one of his tokens +1/+1 counter, and everything Death Touch. Then he casts Launch the Fleet, where Strive equals 7. So he's going to make a bunch of 1/1 tokens whenever he attacks. He lines up his attacks at Chris and Kovacs, who all declare blocks against some of his creatures, but nevertheless, he deals enough damage to Chris to knock him out of the game, and then he leaves Kovacs at a measly 2 points of life. Nearly put him all the way to 0, but thanks to his blocks, Kovacs survived. Over to Kovacs' turn, he plays a Zangor Shaman, which triggers his War Storm, which will deal points of damage directly to Ryan's face. Then he casts Magnus the Red, and again triggering Warstorm, dropping Ryan down to 9. He moves to combat, dealing as much damage as he possibly can to him, but still Ryan survives at 4 points of life. And onto Ryan's turn, the writing is on the wall for Kovacs. The forces of chaos really don't have any way out of this. Ryan casts his commander, Marnius Calgar, to send a message and to lead all of his troops into battle, smashing into Kovacs and knocking him out of the game. And this makes Ryan the winner. Congratulations, buddy, and job well done leading the forces of the Imperium against all of your opponents. And that's the game. We hope you enjoyed. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to thank Ryan and Command Point again for being a part of this video. We all really enjoyed playing these sweet 40k decks. If you haven't already, please subscribe to both of our channels. And as always, thanks for watching.